Thank you, Judy. Welcome everyone to our October lecture on the ancient myth of Demeter and Persephone, who is also called Kore, the maiden. A warm welcome to our guest speaker today, Jungian analyst Sheila Langston from Vancouver, British Columbia. She will address the abduction and loss of Persephone, her transformation in the underworld, the rage and grief of her mother Demeter, and her joyous return. This myth was the basis of a religion called Eleusinian Mysteries that was widely practiced in Greece and throughout the Roman world for 1,000 years. This myth has deep meaning today as a paradigm of the soul's inner journey of transformation and underscores the widespread loss of the feminine in our own world. Sheila Langston is a practicing Jungian analyst. She was trained in Zurich with a background in theater and dance. Her work reflects a unique blend of body, voice, and psyche. She leads study groups and meets her clients in person and by Zoom. Sheila has lectured and taught internationally for many years. Myths, dreams, creativity, and expression are the cornerstones of her work. So on the topic of the abduction of Kore, transformation, and birth of the queen, we welcome Sheila Langston.
Hello, my warm greetings to everyone. Just bear with me for a moment. I'd like to start the screen sharing right away. There we are. Okay. It's Thanksgiving here in Canada, and I would like to express my gratitude to the C.G. Jung Club of Orange County for making these lectures free and accessible to so many people, and for this opportunity to share my material. Virginia, thank you for that wonderful introduction. The title of the talk is The Abduction of Kore, Transformation and Birth of a Queen. I'll be talking today about a specific section of the myth of Demeter and Kore, the abduction and return. This myth is a tale that has guided and supported me for many years, and I hope to explore with you some of the deeper meanings behind the story for all of us. By entering into this world of Kore together, we're dropping into the timeless realm of the deep layers of the unconscious, which connect us all in potent and mysterious ways. As we know, these tales have the capacity to nourish, anchor, and sustain us in times of disruption, loss, and change. Okay, hold on. According to Jung, myths are first and foremost psychic phenomena that reveal the nature of the soul. The story of these goddesses contains, frames, and contextualizes our individual human experience, while also rooting that experience down to an archetypal source, to the very nature of the soul. The many tellings and retellings of the myth, along with innumerable scholarly treatises, poems, plays, and psychological interpretations, speak to the depth and power of this ancient story and how it's rooted in the depths of the psyche. Each of these many versions and variants of the myth bring a different nuance to our understanding of its meaning. And there is no one right or true rendition, no one right or true meaning. Each of us who may have been called to this myth will have our own thoughts, ideas, fantasies, and interpretations. Here we have a contemporary image of the mother-daughter dyad, along with an outline. We'll start with the telling of the myth and then look at each of the main figures. Following this, we'll explore the nature and meaning of abduction, the underworld, and what might be considered the psychological necessity of abduction. This will lead us to transformation and return, followed by a summing up and time for discussion, observations, and questions. The story of Demeter and Kore is one that I have known, told, and studied over a number of years. It's said to be one of the very few myths that's rooted in the archetype of the feminine, and one of the few myths that is for women. The very first time I encountered this myth, it was told to me. That is, I heard it as opposed to reading it. An important aspect of that first hearing, and one that has remained meaningful in subsequent reflections and in working with the myth, is that when the maiden was simply Demeter's daughter, before the abduction by Hades, she was called by the name Kore. After the descent and time in the underworld, she returned with the name Persephone. In this presentation, I will use the name Kore to refer to the maiden before the abduction, and Persephone as the one who returns from the underworld. For anyone who's not familiar with the tale, here are the bare bones. Demeter was the grain goddess, and she lived blissfully and peacefully with her beloved daughter Kore, until the day that Hades decided he wanted Kore for his wife. Hades went to his brother Zeus and said he wanted to marry Kore and take her to live with him in the underworld. Together with Gaia, the great Earth Mother, and Zeus, the three immortals set a trap, and Kore was taken by Hades to the underworld. Demeter searched for her daughter for many days, and with the help of Hecate, she discovered that Hades had taken her. She withdrew into her temple, neglecting her fields and her forests, and everything on the earth began to die. Zeus finally sent Hermes to Hades to tell him he must send Kore back to her mother. Hades reluctantly agreed, and as she was leaving, he offered her seeds from the pomegranate, which she swallowed. And I'll leave it there for now, and when we come to the return section of the talk, we'll hear more about that. For my part, I have long been drawn to the mystery of what remains untold. What happens to Kore in the underworld? Who is this archetypal feminine figure in the human psyche, the maiden who is taken in a descent to Hades, endures great suffering, and is finally returned, named, crowned, renewed, and transformed? And above all, what is the transformation which occurs in the world below? Here I'll inquire into the deeper meanings behind that singular moment of abduction and that which follows. I'll begin with an excerpt from the Homeric hymn to Demeter, which is believed to be a product of the 8th century BCE, although this mother-daughter story of loss and return has its roots in an ancient system of cult, ritual, and sacrifice. Following the Homeric hymn, I will tell of the experience of the descent from the perspective of Kore, as it came to me in an active imagination. Although I've prepared slides in order to read along, I invite you to listen, as we have listened to tales for millennia. Betty Mallet-Smith, a scholar of ancient Greek myth, speaks of a summoning, which has the potential to call us to a new level of being. Please make yourselves comfortable. Feel free to close your eyes and allow yourself to be summoned and your imagination to take flight. I begin my song of the holy goddess, fair-haired Demeter, and of her slim-ankled daughter, whom Aidoneus snatched away, and Zeus, the loud crashing, the wide-voiced one, granted it. She was playing with the daughters of Ocean, away from Demeter, and she was gathering flowers through the luxuriant meadow, roses, saffron, violets, iris, hyacinth, and a narcissus, which was a trap planted for the blossoming maiden in accord with Zeus's plans, a favor to Hades. It was radiantly wonderful, inspiring awe in all who saw it. 100 stems grew from its root, and the whole wide heaven above, the whole earth, and the salt surge of the sea smiled for joy at its fragrance. The girl was charmed by it and reached out both hands to pluck the pretty plaything. Suddenly the earth split open wide along the plain, and from it the Lord host of many, Cronus's son of many names, darted out on his immortal horses. He grabbed her, resisting and screaming, and took her away in his chariot. She lifted her voice in a cry, but no one, God or mortal, heard her voice, not even the glorious fruited olive trees, except the daughter of Perses, Hecate of the glistening veil, who, from her cave, heard. I feel the tug at my ankle. Has the earth split open? I didn't hear it. I wasn't paying attention. I was busy with my life, busy with the flowers, busy with my playmates in the sunshine. I know my mother was there somewhere. She was always there every day of my life, my bright, loving mother. She's the one who's always present. She is the bright, warm one, the enveloping, protecting embrace that says, you are enough. You are just right, exactly as you are. Where is she now? Down, down, down into the dark, into a world I never ever imagined, a world which I can't even comprehend because there's nothing I recognize. It is so dark. I hear the breathing of the horses. I feel his hand gripping my wrist. It's like slow motion. For a long, long moment, I see the slow trail of light as it recedes. I smell the fading scent of the flowers. I hear the echo of my own voice calling to my mother, and then the long moment is over and it's black. There's nothing. Only the hand gripping my wrist, the sound of the hard breathing of the horses, and a feeling of descending. I'm going down further than I could ever have imagined, losing all that was left above, dropping down and down into a darkness so unknown and so complete that I can only wait. Finally, we come to a stop. The hand is still on my wrist. I know we've stopped because the feeling of the air on my skin has changed. I still see nothing. What's happened to my eyes? Where is my vision gone? I only feel the pounding of my heart, his hand on my wrist, and now suddenly a hard pull, and I'm standing trying to keep my balance. There's no point of reference, and it feels like everything is spinning. If it weren't for the hand on my wrist and now at my waist, I would fall. My sense of his touch, all of a sudden, is that it is not harsh, but gentle, insistent, firm, but gentle. I still can't see. I feel as though I will begin to scream and thrash, fall into a panic as large as the sea, as endless as the sky. Oh, mother, the sky. Where is the sky gone? The panic is building inside, creating a pressure which I have never known. And just as I feel it beginning to rush out of me in a torrent, a torch is lit. The light is so dazzling that for a moment I can see absolutely nothing. But the panic is gone, shocked out of me by this sudden appearance of light, which brings with it a feeling of possibility, a chance of seeing. Let's just take a quiet moment to allow the story to resonate, to echo in our minds and bodies and imaginations. I invite you to be aware of how the images and the words have affected you, where you're feeling the story. Now, let's all take a big breath. Perhaps have a little bit of a shift or a stretch and let your eyes move away from the screen for a moment. Just have a little wiggle moving out of the world of the story. And we'll turn our attention to the figures in the tale now. Kore, Demeter, Hecate, Hades, and Hermes. Each of these figures is involved with this archetypal pattern of abduction and return. As unconscious tendencies in the psyche, you may perhaps intuitively recognize them. They also affect us in our daily lives. And some of you may have dreamed of a Mother Demeter figure or a frightening Hades figure who is pursuing you. For the purposes of this talk, I've selected just a few aspects of each figure. We'll begin with Kore. Kore is a Greek word meaning maiden. In its original usage, it was not actually a name, but a general descriptor of a state of being, a maiden. The etymological root of Kore is growing or to grow. It is the feminine form of koros, which means sprout. It was associated with the state of being virgin, and the Latin root of the word virgin takes us to virga, or young shoot. This word, kore, therefore, when applied to the figure in the myth, indicates an aspect of the feminine whose condition is virginal, innocent, chaste, pure, and related to the beginnings of growth or development, i.e., seed or sprout-like. She represents the archetypal virgin maiden who is unmanned. She is the daughter. That is, she is still bound to the mother and has not yet been penetrated by the masculine spirit. Therefore, she represents the whole, innocent, fresh, always new face of the feminine. Symbolically, she might be seen in the new buds of spring or in the seeds just newly sprouted. We see her in figures of girls, perhaps our daughters, in dreams. Or she may be symbolized by a creature or a feminine figure who evokes purity and that which is unawakened. In the personal realm, we might say that the Kore aspect in the psyche is that young feminine energy which is happy, light, and carefree. She plays and sings and dances and gathers flowers, and mother is always there to look after everything. She is in potentia. She's unburdened by responsibility, joyous, ever hopeful. She's naive and sweet, blithe and playful. Some of us may know or remember this in ourselves, or recognize it in others. We see the negative side of this archetypal maiden as the puella, the feminine form of the puer aeternus. The eternal girl, she flits from thing to thing and never settles, has difficulty with the restrictions of ordinary life, coveting freedom and lightheartedness, and is resistant to boundaries or limits. In our tale, Kore is the virgin maiden who is abducted by Hades into the underworld. That in us, which is pulled to experiences which are both shattering and potentially transformative. Who then is it that returns? She is no longer Kore. She is now Queen Persephone. She has a name of her own. We could say then that there are two faces to this virgin feature. One is Kore, the naive, unawakened, pure aspect. Persephone is the other, the virgin attitude which returns from its descent. Esther Harding writes about this Persephone aspect of the virgin. The woman who is virgin, one in herself, does what she does not because of any desire to please, not to be liked or to be approved, even by herself, not because of any desire to gain power over another, to catch his interest or love, but because what she does is true. She does what she does because what she does is true. And now we'll turn to Demeter. Demeter is the corn goddess, the grain goddess, the earth mother. In the ancient Greek pantheon, Demeter was the sister of Hera, Hestia, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, fathered by Kronos, mothered by Rhea. However, there's evidence that she was, in fact, a much more ancient goddess, related to the great goddess, revered and honored in relation to the earth and its fertility, long before the Greek gods took their place on Mount Olympus. She's most often represented in art, both ancient and modern, as here, holding a sheaf of corn, or sometimes a cornucopia. She is an aspect of the mother archetype, primarily to do with the fertility and renewal of the crops and the land from which they spring. She is, as well, an earth goddess associated with cultivation, and she was invoked in two seasons, spring and fall. She sustains the process between sowing of the seed and taking of the harvest of the grain. She represents both growth and fruition. Without her blessing, the crops will fail. In our myth, Demeter is the aspect of the mother which is not only burgeoning and fertile, expansive and engendering, but also fierce and destructive, withholding and implacable. When her daughter is taken, she defies all the gods and is not concerned with the death and starvation of the humans and the animals. We see here the annihilating side of the archetype. She would destroy the whole earth and turn her back on all the gods in order to have her daughter back. This dark side of the Demeter archetype would swallow Kore, the daughter, back into her belly, keeping her safe, but also cut off from the masculine, from consciousness, from the daughter's own transformation and fruitfulness. We can see a negative possession by this archetype in a maternal power drive, which works in all of us through the mother complex. The mother complex, along with the archetype of the mother, is multifaceted and finds its expression in a multitude of forms. In the interests of time, we'll keep our exploration of this rich topic brief. A woman possessed by this maternal power drive, this negative aspect of the archetype, might experience no life of her own, but only in relation to her children or child substitute. She would swallow everyone up in her unconscious power drive to be the one and only, the great mother. She's ultimately lost to herself in the identification with the archetype. Or, like Kore in the myth, a woman might be kept a child herself under the influence of this powerful inner Demeter mother. The experience of a man who's possessed by this negative aspect is a little different. His masculine energy might be smothered by this powerful inner mother, leaving him weakened and somehow unable to step fully into his life as a man. As women, we may be at one moment related to the Demeter face of this dual nature, and at the next to the Kore. At one moment feeling the positive side, and the next the negative. As men, you might find this duality in your intimate relationships with women, partner, sister, daughter, mother. Demeter is associated with earth, with planting, harvesting, nourishment, life and the living, as well as with rage, withholding, devouring, and punishment. Kore belongs with beginnings, new life, innocence, and possibility, as well as with abduction, despair, loss, and death. Here's a sculpture found in the Neolithic settlement of Çatalhöyük in southern Turkey. This image reveals the powerful unity of this mother-daughter archetype. They are essentially one being. In an individual psyche, as well as in all relationships, especially those between women, the mother and the daughter are simultaneously present. There's a mysterious interchangeability in this duality. The line between one and the other becomes blurred. Who is mother and who is daughter? Here's a dream which points directly to this paradox. All dreams are told in the first person. I entered the room where my mother was sleeping in order to wake her up. She hears me and awakens and reaches for my hand, saying, "Mama?" In that instant, the dreamer was both the daughter and the mother, and the dream mother was also the daughter. The third face of this feminine trinity is the goddess Hecate. She is present both at the moment of Kore's abduction and at her return. According to the hymn to Demeter, she is the one who hears Kore's screams from her cave far away. It is she who finally comes to Demeter to tell her that she heard Kore's cries, but did not see who abducted her. It is she who accompanies Demeter to ask the sun god Helios what he saw from his chariot high above. And it is she who appears when Persephone emerges from the underworld, joining with Demeter in showering love on the returned goddess. As with many of the gods and goddesses, Hecate's origin is shrouded in mystery. In the first known writings about her, circa 700 BCE, she's described as a very powerful mother goddess, reigning over earth, sea, and the heavens. Her original stature was evidently much more far-reaching than the Hecate of later times, when she was relegated to the dark, the night, and witchcraft. Hecate has three faces. She's represented in image and art in a variety of threefold forms. In the form of a pillar known as a hecation, she stands at the three forked crossroads, as well as at entrances. She is perceived as being all-seeing, even omniscient. We can easily imagine that her threefold vision allows a seeing in time, past, present, and future. Hecate is a wonderful, mysterious goddess of twilight and of the dark, who roams the earth and guards the threshold of the underworld. She's known as keeper of the keys, which unlock the gates to the underworld, and as the torchbearer who lights the way both down and back. Erich Neumann says she's the mistress of the three realms, sky, earth, and the underworld. She's a cave dweller and a night walker, often accompanied by dogs. She could be said to be symbolic of intuition, she who sees things not yet visible or conscious. She is one who sees the future, with her dogs who sniff out what is around the corner. She's associated with the dark of the moon, at times referred to as the moon goddess. Hecate has to do with liminality, with transitions, with crossings. As one of the guardians of the underworld, she's also guardian of the inner world. She's a goddess of boundaries and is a connector and a guide between conscious and unconscious. She's present at all thresholds, at death, at birth, as well as in our psychic descents to and returns from the underworld. One can imagine that in our crucial transitions in life, where the future is completely unknown, that one is roaming in the dark with Hecate, and that this archetypal presence sees the way. In holding up her torches, she's lighting the way step by step. She sees all the possibilities. She might help to keep us related to our own dark inner nature, our nighttime wandering, our intuitive selves that can see in the dark of the moon. And she can be of aid in returning us to life after a sojourn in the underworld, lighting the way with her torches. We could say she's a figure that represents the transcendent function, which Jung describes as a function uniting the rational and the irrational, a bridge between consciousness and the unconscious. By the 1st century AD, Hecate had become associated with witches and with witchcraft, likely because of her association with the night and the dark of the moon. Like so much of the feminine that was split off, particularly with the advent of Christianity, she began to be seen as menacing. She is, therefore, on one hand, the goddess of witchery and sorcery, of nightmare and hauntings, and on the other hand, an archetypal presence within that is to do with birth, union, crossings and transitions, protection, descent and return. She witnesses. She watches with her 3 heads and observes much that is not seen by others. She inhabits the edges, the boundaries, the fringes, both in myth and in our psyches. Together, 3 goddesses, Kore Persephone, Demeter, and Hecate, conjoined to form a feminine trinity which rules over the realm of the dead, Persephone, the world of the living, Demeter, and the liminal and shadowy realm that connects the two, Hecate. They represent a triad which includes beginnings, fruition, and death, sometimes referred to as maiden, mother, crone. And together they create a whole which traverses all three of these realms, a feminine web that forms a totality. The next figure who appears in the tale is Hades, which brings us to the underworld and to abduction. In Greek mythos, Hades was one of the three sons of Kronos, his brothers being Zeus and Poseidon. They defeated the Titans, and when the realm of Kronos was divided among the three brothers, Hades was given the kingdom of the underworld to rule. Zeus, of course, rules the heavens, and Poseidon the sea. Hades is the name we give to the god, but it is also a place name, and the two became conflated over time. I use the two interchangeably, and I hope the context will make it clear which one I'm referring to. Mary-Louise von Franz states that the underworld gods are usually the gods of the great mystery. I have taken this in part as precautionary, a warning to approach such gods with great care and with an eye to the response of the unconscious through dreams. One must go towards such mystery in an appropriate manner and with respect for the vast power of the unconscious. Indeed, the ancient Greeks hesitated to even name him, and his earliest name, Aidoneus, is generally thought to mean the unseen one. Hades, the god, is rarely evidenced in ancient art, and there are few known shrines dedicated to him, no temples or altars reserved for him. What is now most commonly believed is that the necromantion of Acheron in Greece, mentioned in texts as long ago as the 5th century BCE, was a portal to the underworld and the temple to the dead, dedicated to Hades and Persephone. Necromantion means the oracle of the dead, and people came there to talk with or sacrifice to their dead. Here, ceremonies and rituals were held, and in fact demanded, in order that the living might contact the dead. There are conflicting stories about whether there was in fact a true portal to Hades. There are several sites in Greece which claim to be the portal, and Jung stated that there were any number of entrances to Hades in antiquity. Even now, many countries claim to have portals to the underworld or gates to hell. From Mount Azore in Japan to Dervezé, Turkmenistan, to Pennsylvania, USA, signifying perhaps that it is less difficult than one may think to slip down or to be pulled down into Hades. Wherever the portal to Hades may have been, it was said that people who sacrificed to the beings of the underworld had to do so with averted gaze. To approach this deity was to come perilously close to death itself. And in order to remain in the world of the living, one must not look directly into the world of the dead. Who and what is he in the psyche? this invisible one, this dark god. If we approach the god Hades from a psychological perspective, perhaps it must be with head averted. Hades, the unseen one, is an archetypal energy in the unconscious, which carries us into a psychological experience of the kingdom of the dead. He might be said to be representative of an aspect of the dark side of the self. We can see in many world religions this splitting between the benevolent, loving, divine creator and the evil, punishing side, which is often relegated to a world below. This invites us to consider the archetypal opposites of the dark and light sides of the God image, as Jung wrote about extensively in Ion. On the personal level, Christine Downing writes, Hades is the name for that in me which pulls me to engagements with my inner self that I long to resist, and yet find to be the times of real soul making. Curiously, in mythology, the god Hades is not death itself, nor does he bring the living to the underworld. He is known as the receiver of the dead and is concerned only with his rule over them. However, many of us have had the experience in which he comes unseen, the invisible God, and were taken unwillingly in a descent to the underworld in order to transform and be returned. Could it be that this fall into darkness is a natural and necessary psychological event in order for any meaningful transformation to take place? Surely all the stories of descent, of death and rebirth, speak of a necessary and inevitable psychic process. In the following excerpt from a poem by Wendell Berry, he suggests that one must enter the dark completely, and that there one may find an unseen life force. To go in the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go dark. Go without sight and find that the dark too blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings. Now we're going to move and speak about abduction. Here we see a sculpture by the Italian artist Gian Lorenzo Bernini from the 17th century of the seizing of Kore by Hades. I've titled this talk, The Abduction of Kore. Abduction means a leading away. It is taken from the Latin abductionem, a forcible carrying off, ravishing, robbing, and abducere, to lead away, take away. The etymology of abduction describes an inescapable force, within or without, which takes one away against one's will, away from all that is known, familiar, valued, cherished. One could argue that in the leading away, there's a goal, a destination. As well as being taken away from something, one is being taken to something else. However we may frame it, it is a brutal, forceful rupture within the psyche. When we speak of a man or a woman who has been pulled to the underworld, we could say that psychologically, some or all of that person's libido, their instinctual energies, have been abducted into the unconscious. In outer life, that might be experienced as depression, neurosis, dissociation, and in extreme cases, as a psychotic episode. We might call it an occurrence whereby we are taken forcibly out of our life as we have known it. Abduction takes us into a realm of timelessness and lifelessness. Nothing is moving, and apparently nothing is changing, at least to the outer eye. We appear to be in a condition of stasis. We who have had the experience of being seized and taken into the dark depths of the underworld might feel our experience as a kind of soul abduction. Death of the self that was before, a violent psychic intrusion into our most precious inner selves, with a desperate sense that life will never be the same. And indeed, it never can be. In this sense, the violent abduction by the dark god may be seen as psychic initiation. An initiation in this sense is an enforced ritual transformation of consciousness. It signifies the complete ending of one state of being and the beginning of a new one. Of course we resist. Of course we scream for mother, for father. We're being taken down into an unknown realm in the unconscious where we'll undergo deprivation, grief, isolation, fear, and despair. And yet, might it be true in a symbolic sense that if we weren't taken with force, we would never leave the fields of flowers, never leave the world of the mother, the bountiful, the breast? One way to think about these abductions is to consider the possible need for a reforging of the link between consciousness and the unconscious. One is given the chance to begin, or perhaps to continue, the process of psychological transformation. Jung writes, "Nothing endangers this connection to the unconscious in a man or a woman more than a successful life. It makes him forget his dependence on the unconscious." When we're successful, we may forget about and get out of connection with the deeper truths of the unconscious, busily identified only with the ego. We're cut off from our roots, and then there might be an abduction in an attempt to bring the two back into relationship. It may be of the deepest necessity that we're seized and brought to a descent such as this. Then the task becomes that of discerning meaning in the abduction itself, so that the descent doesn't become merely a pathology or something to be fixed. A myth such as this can be a lifeline to hold to in these times of darkness, providing a larger frame of reference and the opportunity to hold in consciousness the archetypal nature of descent and return. In our myth, this forcible abduction breaks the mother-daughter bond and marks the end of Kore's innocence. The daughter has been enfolded in the world of the mother, both nurtured and possessed by her. This initial fusion is shattered by the seizing of Kore by Hades, splitting the dyad and initiating a transformation. Therefore, we might say that the impulse to separate the mother-daughter dyad is a necessary psychic drive toward regeneration and greater consciousness. I'm going to say that again. We might say that this impulse to separate the mother-daughter dyad is a necessary psychic drive toward regeneration and greater consciousness. This loss of Kore may be experienced as an outer or an inner occurrence. In the personal realm, when this fusing between actual mother or mother-like figure and daughter occurs, when this fusing occurs, there's a loss of individuality. The mother may live out her dreams and hopes through the life of the daughter, and the daughter is bound by her unconscious identification with the mother. She lacks a sense of who she is in herself and of what creativity she might be capable. This mutually bound duo must, according to the myth, be separated in order for the daughter to die to her present state. Even when flesh and blood, mother and daughter, have become estranged and there's no contact between them, they frequently remain bound together in an unconscious union. The effort to separate from one another requires enormous energy. In the myth, it takes the combined might of the three immortals, Gaia, Zeus, and Hades. Both in the myth and in the human experience, this splitting of the dyad is inevitably accompanied by terrible anguish. Now let's pause for a moment and gather in. I invite you, first of all, to have a stretch or roll your shoulders, take a few deep breaths, and take a short visual break from the screen. Maybe just look around the room, look out the window. You don't need to see the screen while I just say the next couple of things. We have, up to now, listened to the section of the tale wherein Kore is abducted into the underworld. We explored the archetypal figures of Kore, Demeter, Hecate, and Hades, and pondered over their meaning and their influence on ego consciousness. We've looked at the motif of abduction and perhaps considered our own personal experiences of this mythic event. You may have experienced moments of resonance with the tale or with the events or figures. Let's just all sit quietly for a moment with whatever's cooking right now, and to listen to our bodies and our hearts and our souls, to feel our response. When you're ready, you might want to take a deep breath in, all the way in, and all the way out. And now we'll plunge a little deeper into the motif of the underworld. Beliefs about the underworld, death, and what occurs after death are widespread throughout time and across cultures. A full-scale account of world beliefs about death in the underworld is a massive topic, and I've limited my investigations to the more accessible and perhaps more well-known cultures, at least to the Western world. Within these constraints, I've found there are certain motifs which are common to many of these mythologies of after death and the underworld. For one, it is often located beneath the earth in a subterranean locale. Hades is just one expression of these subterranean underworld beliefs. In ancient Sumeria, the underworld was Kur, or Irkala, a dreary, dark cave located deep under the earth. The Egyptian underworld was the Duat. Judaism speaks of Sheol, in the lowest parts of the earth to which all the dead descend. In Islamic writing, the Quran refers to Al-Nar, the fire, or Jahannam, an abyss. The Hindu concept of hell is Naraka, which contains up to 28 separate hells. In Zoroastrianism, Dozakh was called the house of falsehood and was described as a dark, stinking well. We are, of course, familiar with the Christian hell, which was a pit of fire and torment down below. Other elements which seem to be common to these various hells are metaphors of a passage of some kind, a passing through gates or crossing of a river such as the river Styx, a bridge that must be navigated, and locks of all kinds, or simply a place of waiting in a sort of nothingness. Often there's a reckoning, the weighing of the heart against a feather, the crossing of a bridge which narrows and widens according to how one has lived one's life, a guardian at a gate, sometimes simply an immediate decision as to where the soul will go. Most hells or underworlds are ruled by an underworld figure. Again, from the Sumerian, we have Ereshkigal. In ancient Egypt, Osiris was the lord of the underworld. And in Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and even in early Buddhist texts, we have these dark figures who are associated with death and sometimes punishment. In our myth, of course, we have a royal underworld couple, Hades and Persephone. This too is a not uncommon motif. If we look at these descriptions and beliefs about the underworld in psychological terms, we could say that the underworld is symbolic of a realm of the collective unconscious, with its images of down below, that is, below the threshold of consciousness, that there's a journey that's undertaken to arrive there with various obstacles to navigate. And the ruler or rulers might be seen as aspects of the dark side of the self, or the dark face of the god. We might see the various ideas and images of the underworld as projections of all things related to evil, death, and the dead, which are feared and unknown, placed far below the earth into the shadowy realm of hell and torment and suffering. In other words, residing in the unconscious. These images of hell and of the dark face of God also tell us something about the law of compensation. This appears to be an archetypal pattern symbolized in worldwide religious beliefs. It seems that the divine light, or God, must have a shadow which finds its expression in some kind of devil, and that the heavenly must be balanced with the horrific. If there is too much emphasis on the divine light, the compensating forces of the unconscious will find a way to constellate the dark. We see changes over time in terms of how the dark side of the self is represented. It would appear that with the continued development of consciousness, the concept of the underworld and the underworld ruler has changed. In many traditions, the devil is now considered to be an attitude or a concept rather than a figure. And hell might be said to be a state of mind rather than a place. In some parts of the modern Western world, this concept of the dark underworld is often put aside altogether in favor of gaining enlightenment. A dangerous tendency, as we know, for in the unconscious, the shadow just grows stronger in this striving toward the light. In a poem by D.H. Lawrence, we're invited to see the fall of Lucifer in a way that describes this balancing force. When Satan fell, he only fell because the Lord Almighty rose a bit too high, a bit beyond himself. And so Satan only fell to keep a balance. Are you so lofty, O my God? Are you so pure and lofty up aloft? Then I will fall and plant the paths to hell with vines and poppies and fig trees, so that lost souls may eat grapes and the moist fig, and put scarlet buds in their hair on the way to hell, on the way to dark perdition. And hell and heaven are the scales of the balance of life which swing against each other. As I stated earlier, abduction is a motif which occurs in many tales. And one can't help but consider that these repeated themes of abduction and descent point toward their archetypal necessity and inevitability as the means to a rebirth. This leads us to perceive this reordering as a psychic event, not only in an individual life, but in humanity and cultures as a whole. We might even say that these individual and cultural descents are necessary because it is only through an underworld experience that there's a possibility of true transformation and renewal. Abduction occurs in a human life in a myriad of ways, and frequently more than once. We might experience it in the suffering following the death of a loved one, or in a sudden illness or accident, or with the end of a marriage or a deeply meaningful relationship. When one has been abducted, outer life is meaningless. There's no pleasure or satisfaction in outer activity, or perhaps one is simply forced to relinquish all outer activity. Relationships and the usual pastimes are empty and exhausting. Hours can pass by without anything being accomplished, without, in fact, even moving from the bed or the chair or the couch. All is gray and dull, cold and lifeless, as the underworld is so often described. It's only through an immense effort of the will that one can do anything at all. There's no energy for true reflection because there's no light with which to reflect. The suffering is exquisite and inescapable. All one can do is wait. One is being kept underground by the god. At these times, something in us has been called to the realm of death. And there, it might be transformed into some form of new life, or alternatively, it could simply remain there, dying to this life. It seems essential that we maintain the correct attitude to the experience, that we maintain a sense of presence, as well as humility in the face of the unconscious, of its life and death-dealing power. We need, too, to continue to hold our ground and standpoint to the best of our ability, knowing that we're not meant to crumble or run. In essence, we're talking about a balance of complete surrender to the power of the unconscious and the guidance of the self, with a continued awareness on the part of the ego so that one is not swept away. That means having the capacity to hold the tension between surrender and mindful presence. Perhaps one aspect of this seizure has something to do with the desire of Hades himself. Perhaps there's a stirring of the god in the underworld, his own desire for completion, for recognition, and to be connected in some way to the world of the living feminine. A sentence came to me in a dream while I was reflecting on Hades. If desire is an initiator, but the sentence remained incomplete. Having reflected on this, I might complete the sentence with, if desire is an initiator, then the entire journey of Kore began with the desire of Hades. We could conjecture that there's a longing in that underworld of death and of unalleviated darkness for life and for fruitfulness, indicating a desire in the unconscious itself to be united with conscious life, an urge toward consciousness. And now we come to the great mystery, the transformation. According to the myth, transformation occurs in the darkness below, beyond seeing or conscious knowing. In our story, the death of Kore and the rebirth into Persephone happens in the underworld. The human experience of a psychological death and rebirth also primarily happens in the unconscious. One can try to describe the experience. One may dream. One can certainly feel and know the experience of having been abducted, of loss and of suffering. But the process of the transformation itself remains an enigma. It happens in the dark, in the unconscious, in the realm of the other world. One just knows one day that something has been irrevocably altered. Here's a dream. I got a panicked phone call from a young man who was my neighbor. His younger sister had ingested something. When I got there, he was lying terrified on the ground. His sister was completely encased in a clear sheath, a kind of chrysalis. I could see that she was half transformed. Her limbs looked as though they were undergoing some form of transformation from one shape to another. Because this is a dream about transformation, we'll take a moment to look at it a little more closely. The dreamer, in reality, had a close relationship with this young woman who'd been a good friend of the dreamer's daughter. We could say she's a Kore figure, a daughter-like figure to the dreamer. She's encased in a sheath, which revealed the dissolving of the limbs. The dissolution of her arms and legs is symbolic of a loss of agency. Without legs and feet, one has lost the ability to move from here to there. One has lost one's connection to earth, lost one's mobility and standpoint. Without arms and hands, there's no way to make things happen. One can't grasp anything, hold anything, touch anything. Without limbs, one is completely disabled. What will happen to the head and the torso? Will these two dissolve and undergo a metamorphosis? We might look at this as a complete dissolution of the I am, of the ego personality, in the service of rebirth and renewal. One of the greatest natural examples of the transformative process is the often described miraculous metamorphosis of caterpillar into butterfly. If you were online for Tom Elsner's talk on thresholds, liminality, and transformation last month, you'll remember that he spoke about the cocoon, the chrysalis. The melting and dissolving of the old body within the container of the chrysalis and the emergence of the new creature is a natural and physical phenomenon which mirrors the psychological process of transformation. One thing we do know is that within the cocoon, even while the dissolving is in process, there is at the same time a miraculous development of what are called imaginal discs, a highly organized group of cells which will become certain parts of the butterfly body. In the psyche, too, also part of nature, there must be these imaginal discs, which hold the future possibilities of the developing personality, even while the old is dissolving. When the butterfly emerges from the cocoon, it frequently releases a red drop, as though making a small blood sacrifice, or as though revealing that the process of transformation requires our life's blood. What is never revealed, however, and remains unknowable, is what exactly transpires within the cocoon. As with the process of psychic death and renewal, it must remain a mystery. It's as if the gestating of the new life must have that time of dark, of privacy, of not being seen, in order for the miracle of the new to emerge. As if the slow pulse of change can happen only in the dark, in the deepest realms of the unconscious. In winter, the seeds below the earth must wait until all of the elements needed for new growth converge. We, as seeds, must wait through the psychological winter until all the forces align and we can begin the journey back to life. This brings us to the return. A key moment in the transition from underworld to upper world is the moment Persephone swallows the pomegranate seeds. There are many versions of this moment. Some speak of coercion by Hades, others of stealth, and still others of willing agreement. What is consistent, however, is that it was the seeds of the pomegranate which she swallowed, and that she swallowed them just as she was about to make her return. There are different accounts of the number of seeds and the manner in which they were given and taken. What is told over and over is the fact that they were indeed pomegranate seeds, and that they were supplied by Hades to ensure that his bride did not stay forever in the upper world with her mother. As a motif in fairy tales from around the world, to eat food in the other world is extremely dangerous. It binds a person to that place, either by changing their nature or through tethering some essential part of the person to that place forever. Kore has ingested with the seeds the very nature of the underworld. Therefore, some part of her is destined to remain always connected to Hades and their shared kingdom. Let's have a look at the pomegranate. In its appearance, with its outer shell, the sweet secret pockets, and the deep red, luscious-looking seeds, the pomegranate is a perfect image of the womb, the ovaries, and the waiting eggs in a woman's body. The thick outer shell is like the walls of the uterus. The pockets which contain the seeds are like the ovaries. and the seeds themselves represent the ova and their embryonic possibility, symbolizing life in potentia. The red juice is like the blood flowing through and within the entire reproductive system and represents the essence of the life force. The entire fruit carries an association to the feminine principle, and the seeds to generation, creativity, potentiality, growth, and change. In ritual and celebration worldwide, the pomegranate is symbolic of endings and beginnings, seasons, transitions, birth, new life, and fertility. At the moment of eating the seeds, Persephone is poised between the underworld and the upper world, between the old and the new, between death and life. There she is, between opposites, in what we might call a threshold moment. She's in neither place, yet touching both. This is a potent time, a time of both infinite possibility and of loss. There she is, between below and above for just those few precious breaths. At that exact moment, she takes into herself with the seeds the essence of the underworld, and her fate is sealed. Eating those seeds at just that juncture means she will forevermore be of both places. As she is carried away from Hades and toward her mother, she brings with her, inside her very being, all of the fertility and abundance which is symbolized by the seeds and the fruit, but as well the darkness and death of the realm of the underworld. This is a wonderful and baffling paradox, that the very thing that represents abundance and potential new life comes from the place of death. In our personal descents, if we dare to eat the seeds of the fruit of the underworld, that is, if we truly take in, swallow, and digest the essence of the experience, then we're filled with both the seeds of fertility and of the knowledge of the shadow of life. We can no longer continue in complete naivete. Like Persephone, we are always afterward of two realms. According to the myth, the journey is not complete until we eat and digest the very heart of the fruit of Hades. In other words, until we consciously swallow the bitter and the sweet of our personal experience of abduction and absorb its meaning. Only then are we able to return to life. However, we're forever linked to that world and to the dark god. One never forgets the abduction to the world of the dead, the suffering, and the painful metamorphosis. As we know, in the myth, Hermes is finally sent by Zeus to negotiate with Hades to bring Persephone back from the underworld to her mother. There are literally thousands of written works on Hermes. Jung alone has innumerable references to Hermes and to his counterpart, Mercurius. Here, I'll focus on a few attributes which are pertinent to this tale. In ancient Greece, Hermes was initially represented by the herm, which was just a heap of stones marking a boundary, a threshold, or a crossroad. The herm later became a pillar, as we see in this image on the left, with the head of Hermes and male genitalia, frequently with an erect phallus. We're thus reminded of his potency and fertility. Through his association with thresholds and boundaries, and as the only god who could move between worlds, he's a mediator between Olympus and Hades, divine light and divine dark, consciousness and the unconscious. He is a god of knowledge and the word. He has an affiliation to magic, and he's also known as a trickster and a thief. In more modern images, we see him with winged shoes or a winged helmet, a staff, sometimes a cloak. In the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Hermes is told to use smooth words with Hades, indicating perhaps his ability to be a little tricky, to convince and to insinuate. As a figure in the collective unconscious, Hermes in our tale might be said to be a force which appears as a messenger from the self to carry one back to life. When one has been taken into the underworld, held captive by the dark god, only after the required length of time may the transformation be said to be complete. And only then can the light-footed trickster slip in and use his smooth words to convince the dark god to release the bound one. Only then do we experience the divine act of grace in which we are returned to the world and to life. He, like Hecate, is a numinous representative of the transcendent function, that which unites the opposites. According to the myth, we might say that Hermes is required for the completion of the cycle. He's part of the archetypal solution. Up they flew with Hermes leading the way. The journey was completed quickly, and they drew up in front of Demeter, where she stood waiting with hope and disbelief in her breast. When the two goddesses saw one another, they ran to each other, and their reunion was full of tears and laughter and exclamations. When the first rush of emotion had slowed, Demeter looked more carefully at her daughter and said, "My most beloved Kore, you have changed." Her daughter replied, "Mother, I am no longer Kore. My name is Persephone, and I am queen of the underworld." Demeter felt a flash of alarm, and she said, "Tell me, daughter, did you eat anything in the underworld?" Persephone said, "Why, yes. I swallowed 3 seeds of the pomegranate just before coming back to you." In the first moment of return in the myth, Demeter and Persephone come face to face. Mother and daughter encounter one another after the long separation. What do the two goddesses see? Each has lived without the other for the first time. Each has had her own profound experiences. What had been the original one, the mother-daughter unity, has become two. These two aspects of one whole that have been separated come together again in this moment of return. Yet they cannot ever return to the original unconscious totality. In thinking about the return and meeting of the goddesses, I imagine that potent moment of recognition of all that is familiar and all that has changed. Although each has never stopped loving the other, nor lost the hope of being together once again, they can never go back to the way things were. Demeter is the grain goddess. She will always seed and grow the grains of the earth. But with this daughter who is queen of the underworld, there must now also be the darkness, the winter. Death has entered the garden. Just as we can say Kore brought lightness and the nature of beginnings to the dark of the underworld, so now does Persephone bring darkness and death to the light of the upper world. In truth, the underworld, or in a broader sense, the unconscious, is dark, chaotic, and undifferentiated. It is only with the return to the upper world that consciousness may be brought to an underworld experience and meaning be made of what's transpired there. It's like a long and effort-filled trek through deep snow or sand. One is so intent on putting one foot in front of the other that it is only when one arrives on solid ground that one can look back and see where one has come from and what the path has been. The transformation may take place in the underworld, but it requires the return and metaphorically the light of the upper world in order for it to become conscious. How might we begin to understand what has been transformed? What do we experience when we are brought face to face with that transformed part of ourselves from which we have been severed? It may be like meeting someone for the first time and having to get to know this new and deeply changed aspect. What is called for then is an acknowledgement that there has been a change, rather than attempting to pretend all is as it was, or to try to return to an old way of being. This acknowledgement necessarily leads to the next step, an honest evaluation and coming to terms with what is now, and a subsequent or concurrent letting go of what was. In the myth, we see this in the negotiation and final agreement regarding the length of time that Persephone will stay with her mother and when she'll return to Hades. Both Demeter and Persephone have accepted that this is the new life, and there will be no return to the way it had been. In closing, we've seen how the abduction of Kore leads to a time of darkness for both daughter and mother, giving rise to transformation and a new configuration. This is a process originating in the depths of the unconscious, and the abduction itself can be a shocking and overwhelming experience. It appears to be a psychological imperative for some individuals, although it certainly doesn't mean that all people undergo this kind of descent. Nor does it mean that everyone who has been abducted is able or willing to bring consciousness to the transformation which may have taken place. However, for those of us who have been abducted from all that we have known and who are able to adequately surrender to the experience, this myth may provide an anchor to hold to as we suffer the shattering encounter with the underworld. It may be that the ego personality has been imagining the return of Kore, that is, the return of that youthful, hopeful, bright, energetic, always beginning young feminine. And perhaps the abducted aspect has been hoping to return to a state of innocence, has been longing to be mothered. It may take some time, but eventually one realizes that all has changed. The inner Kore will never be recovered, and we must come to terms with the fact that she is truly gone. With the return, one is faced with the unavoidable reality that what has come back has been transformed by the embrace of the dark god. One is then tasked with integrating this knowledge of mortality, of aging, of loss and death. It is a great loss, often accompanied by terrible sorrow. But as well, this renewed and darkened Persephone aspect brings the gift of a particular wisdom, of a particular beauty. This myth is considered by some to be a story of the seasons. In the purely vegetative sense, we know that when the fullness of growth has been reached and the fruition has been accomplished, then we have the winter. In the psychological sense, we can also say that when a particular fullness or integration has occurred, there will eventually be a natural depression, a winter, when all psychic life is pulled into the unconscious in order for eventual new seeding and for new life to emerge. These descents are as natural for the psyche as the seasons are. In ancient Greece, there were temples to the gods and goddesses where offerings were made, rituals enacted, and initiatory practices observed. In the secular world, many of us no longer have these sacred places to which we can retreat in times of darkness. But we do have, in the place of ritual and initiatory rites, these ancient stories. These stories can support us with the knowledge that our personal experiences are part of a grand pattern which even the gods endure. We can see these stories as fundamental features of a lineage, rooting us deeply into the past, as well as into the depths of nature and the human psyche. And finally, now, leaving us with a thought, a question. Might we consider these times of global turmoil in light of this myth? If this is a collective abduction and some part of collective consciousness is in the underworld, might this be the dissolving as we undergo the transformation? May we all hold to the idea that although the journey to the underworld may be inevitable, it can be experienced as a sacred odyssey with the possibility of deepest renewal and return.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm so glad that you mentioned Tom Elsner's talk, because I was so struck by the synchronicity of these two talks, one after another, dealing with transformation. And it's really quite moving.
Mm.
And he used, and you know, I was picturing him using the caterpillar image before you brought it up. So, and even how you just ended with bringing it to what's going on in the world today, that was also something he talked about. So it seems like we sort of had a two-part series on transformation.
Mm.
So please, people, use the raise hand function to ask any questions or make any comments. And we have Margaret Mendenhall.
Hi. Am I on, I guess?
You're good. Yep, you're there.
Yeah.
Okay. First, I want to thank you. That was just really, well, I think it was brilliant. It was really meaningful to me. So thank you for that revisioning of the myth that I thought I knew so well. There was a couple ideas that you mentioned, and I think they're sort of interrelated that I never thought of before. And I was just curious if you could expand a little bit. One was the idea about being kept a child by our own inner mother. And the other was the idea that Puella is a dark side of the Kore.
Great questions. Thanks, Margaret. You know, when I was speaking that bit about the part of us that might be kept a child by that inner mother, I also thought of women who I know, and perhaps you know as well, who have been kept as a child by their outer mother, even after a very powerful, overpowering, devouring kind of outer mother that may have had such power that even after her death, the grown woman, the mature woman, even the aging woman is still very childlike. I feel it's just a fact. It's just so. And maybe you have some more thoughts about that could take this discussion further. And the other part, remind me, Margaret, what was the other second part of the question?
The idea that Puella was a dark side of the Kore.
Yes. I think, you know, I realize that the Puella itself has a dark and light side, where that spirit of newness and inspiration and intuition and brilliance, in fact, can be very positive. However, if it is completely off the ground and not in life, then she never is able to touch down, so to speak, and to fulfill certain psychological tasks that might actually be hers to fulfill. She's so busy off in the sky and the clouds. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. Because it never occurred to me that Puella had a dark side before.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Paula St. Marie.
Hi. I think the Puella has a problematic side. I don't not necessarily see it as dark. But I was listening to you talk about Demeter and Corey and the differences in their approach to life. And I've noticed in myself how if I've never been a mother, I thought I might want to, but it was way too late when I thought about it. I was a nurse. I am a nurse. So I'm kind of able to choose my caretaking. So when somebody, I find, especially late in late life now, when somebody comes to me and they're asking me to take care of things that are not my responsibility, I can really get very angry.
Mm.
And I know I saw my mother do that, and it was kind of even over the irrational side. But I think she was so much depended on as the mother her whole life that her other instincts were really, really very subservient to that role. And I think when she was older, she became, the anger started coming out. But I'm trying to get a grip on it myself. So I'm thinking that that there's something about when it's too much put on the responsibilities of the mother, the caretaking, all these things, too much put on a woman, it can it takes away from the Persephone energy goes underground. You just don't have access to it, and then I think that causes some of the anger too. I was just listening to that, how that might be working, trying to figure it out so that I'm not automatically reacting to it. And other thing is I got to spend a lot of time working with Betty Smith.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and went to her Greek trips, and I think we went to that cave that you showed us. And she was amazing to work with. And hearing, this is one of my favorite stories, and she did a lot of work with it, and especially this time of year with the Eleusinian mysteries around. Yeah, so it's really nice to hear it again. Thank you for doing it.
Very welcome. I'd like to make a comment, Paula, if that's okay,
Sure.
in response to what you've said. I was thinking about that. When people keep, in terms of your work, how people keep asking, they'll keep pushing and wanting and needing more and more and more, and that anger that comes up. I mean, there's two things that strike me. One is it could be, if it doesn't go too far, it could be a very healthy, strong setting of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. And the other thing that occurs to me is that it may be related to some of that crone energy that just has had enough and does not mince words in terms of saying, okay, stop, everybody. Do you know? So those are the two thoughts that came into my mind as you were describing your experience.
Yeah, very strong, but I am getting better at pausing.
Yes. Yes.
Before it comes out. So
yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Next, we have Elizabeth Charles.
Hi there. I'm so very thankful for this moment, this collective moment together. What a beautiful expression and an understanding that I just received. Thank you so very much, Sheila, and everyone here. I have like I guess an understanding or maybe a question, and that is I recently walked my mother home. The last 6 years I was caregiving for her, and she ended up having mild cognitive impairment and then became all the way through to hospice at the end. And it was the most beautiful experience I think I could have ever imagined. And she agreed. And it was heartbreaking, and it was like explosive, but it was so beautifully unifying. And I got to witness my mother become a little girl. And she became a little girl, and she was all about the babies. She saw all the babies, and then she was so light and playful. Whereas what I experienced as and a teenager, adult, all that, I carried a lot of separation. I didn't see her as a child. So now that I saw her as a child, I was able to totally, fully forgive myself, and whatever story I create to separate myself, anyhow. So I just wanted to share that because I think it's quite a beautiful experience to walk, to have that duty as a privilege, not knowing it was going to be a privilege, and not experience it until, I did. And I just wanted to get your insight on like the forgetting of, with the dementia, going back into having that childhood, but then also, seeing the birth, these all the little babies, and always just saying, wanting to go home. I want to go home. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a very beautiful sharing. Thank you. Yeah, I had a similar experience with my mother toward the end, where all of her, I would describe it as her ego construct, the way that she'd managed to live her life and handle life, just crumbled away. And there was a sweetness there and a tenderness that I had rarely seen as a child or as an adult. And I wonder whether it isn't that, that necessary kind of dissolving of the ego strength in order to be able to come to the passage with a kind of an openness and a readiness and an ability to accept and say yes, that strong adult woman ego self might not have been able to do. And very tender for you to be able to then, I think of the little dream that I shared, where the daughter and the mother were both mother and daughter simultaneously, and how there's some of that at the end when one's mother is in that particular part and kind of journey. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Virginia Barrett.
Yes, hi, Sheila. I so enjoyed your retelling of the story, such a rich one. But this time you were highlighting the fact that Kore became Persephone, the queen of the underworld. And I had never really thought about that before. But doesn't that sort of suggest a partnership, because she becomes queen with the king of the underworld, Hades? She's not just a helpless victim, she's actually a partner in the underworld, which gives one hope that the whole process will turn out well.
She does indeed, and in some of my writing and reading about this, I was very struck by that movement into her queendom, into her full self, in a sense, and that it could only happen through the process of the abduction, the experience of the abduction. And in many of the readings, and some of you may also have seen this, that Hades is hardly even referenced in terms of the underworld. It's Persephone who's talked about and met with and engaged with. So she does have an enormous presence in that whole underworld mythology. Thank you, Virginia.
Vandana Chambers.
Thank you so much, Sheila. I truly am so moved by your presentation, and it really invoked in me some pretty powerful intuitions. So I thank you very much. I also studied with Betty Smith for many years, and one of the things I learned from her is to take the myths as a inner pattern, as the way the archetypes and instincts dance in my own psyche. And I remember at the time, one of the things that really struck me was looking at the myth of Demeter and Kore from the standpoint of abduction of little girls in today's society, and the masculine's longing to connect with that threshold maiden aspect of the anima. I did some work on it, but the way you approached it, obviously, is much richer. I wanted to say two things. This might be helpful. Many years ago, I was in Barcelona in the museum, the National Museum, and I saw a painting of the Virgin Mary that just blew my mind. She is being approached by the Holy Ghost, and her posture, unlike in the old traditional Christian myths, paintings, where she's sitting there reading a book very nicely, and she's just smiling at the Holy Ghost. She has raised her hands, and with horror on her face, she's saying a no. And for some reason, that really resonated with the principle of abduction. That when we're being abducted into the unconscious, it is not very nice and sweet. And we don't just go sit there and say, yeah, thank you very much. Come and change me, inspire me, penetrate me, and introduce me to my shadow. So I really thought that, you know, maybe you've seen it, but the other thing is that the whole principle of death and rebirth, you know, when Jung says the ego's death is a victory for the self, this is really what I feel about the seriousness of this descent, at least in my own experience and my experience with my patients, where encounter with the shadow and with the dark side of my own personality is enough to terrify me and change me from that innocent, naive, everything's nice, and I'm so wonderful, and I'm such a great person, to the fact that I have a big witch in my psyche who is constantly attacking me and attacking others. So there is so much that you said, but I don't want to take the time, but thank you so much for activating all this for me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome, Mandana. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you.
Lynn Parta.
Thank you so very much as well, Sheila. And I'm only going to be explaining a little bit that as you were speaking of these extraordinary, necessary balancing, I was thinking about a very dear friend who is from Iran and has been deported and has been trying for about a year and a half to find a place where he can really begin his life again. But all of what you were saying to me, and the fact that he has been so pushed against by those who describe him as being weak, and yet I know that he is going through this encounter with what is a transformative time, but how to actually be accompanying him is something that's a really difficult thing. But I also am asking very much for that inner awareness of where the borders are. I guess I can say it like that. Thank you. If
Literally,
you have any ideas, yes.
literally and figuratively. And I do have an idea, Lynn, in terms of how to accompany him. Tell him stories.
There. Okay.
Tell him the stories. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Julian Fox.
Hi, thanks, Sheila. I have a quick question about whether Persephone might have Stockholm syndrome.
That's a very modern, contemporary question to ask. I think my sense is that these are archetypal figures, and they're way beyond our conscious understanding or labeling in that way. I would say that the mystery of what happens with her and Hades is, again, it's not told as part of the story. And I think that we have to trust that it is also a necessary and unfathomable kind of relationship between those two.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
I don't see, oh, there we go. It's always Joanne Lombardi.
Yes. Hi. I thank you so much for this presentation. I've always been interested in this dynamic of Persephone and Demeter. I recently had a very mature Dark Night of Soul, went down into the underworld, and the transcendent experience was the first time in my life so meaningful. I really, really, really experienced so many deaths. I thought I was literally dying, in that I had to be faced with all the woundings I've ever caused to anybody. It was a very unusual experience. Having said that, what stood out to me is your last minute of this presentation, where as a collective, we might be being abducted into the underworld and meet in that place. And I'm just so fascinated with that possibility and experience, because I'm so much been believing this loss of innocence in our culture right now, as we always go through, but this is such a major loss of innocence and an experience of abandonment by our culture. To me, it's almost like a borderline abandonment experience and rage. And I'm wondering, playing out in this particular loss of interest, how that might play out in the collective unconscious, and meeting there. And we are being called there, I do believe, as a culture. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's very hard. It's very difficult and challenging to be able to think about this, our very real outer global situation, in an objective way. But in those brief moments where I feel like I've had a bit of objectivity, that's when these thoughts have come to me, that actually we have been abducted. There's some part of our collective consciousness that is in the underworld. And if that's so, then to lean into and breathe into and be with, as consciously as possible, that experience of this dissolving, witnessing it as we see it around us, and knowing that that we need Hermes, we need to endure it, and then we're going to need our Hermes to come and get us, the emissary from the self, to come and rescue us. And who knows if we'll see it in our lifetime. But I have to confess that it does give me some ease when I think
Hermes, of it. As Hermes meeting us at the crossroads, there's also, I'm curious about Hecate. Yes. How she is meeting us. She's so much a part of this myth. And now in every day as we are now, how is she meeting us, being with this and contemplating how she's meeting us in this major, as I move into my own crone aspect of me, which I so much more relate to her as well. And how I'm meeting it. The
dark feminine, the mysterious dark feminine who shows up. Yeah, beautiful. I had a thought that Hermes and Hecate were, the feminine and masculine aspects of an archetypal function, an archetypal reality, that numinous transcendent function.
Mhm. Yeah,
And we
absolutely. Yes.
need both of them. We need both of them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah, thank you as well, because you shared with me, opened up the masculine in the whole aspect that I haven't paid much attention to. But yeah, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Mitra Macbula.
Thank you so much. This was one of the most marvelous talks I have ever heard on the Jungian Club platform. Especially for me, it had such an incredible synchronicity attached to it because I was so distraught by all these images coming from my friends in Israel for the abduction of hundreds of people yesterday. And I was really beyond myself because I was watching these images. There were images, children, older people, grandmothers and children. And then there was this one young girl screaming as she was being abducted. And she looks almost a split image of Persephone. And your talk made me think, you see, my heart goes out really to both sides. I just think that this is something, war is sometimes maybe one of the ways Hades uses to get us all to become wiser to the effect of this disjointed pluralism and diversity can lead either to war or to understanding and loving. And to me, I was going to ask you this question, which is the pomegranate, which is very central to the Judaic tradition. And there's a Kabbalistic book called The Garden of Pomegranates. This pomegranate in this tradition represents unity in diversity. And I'm wondering if you came across anything like that with regards to eating of that pomegranate, representing perhaps that human beings are supposed to be able to bring this unity to the diversity after experiencing Hades, after experiencing all the other upper worlds, etc. And that's our task. And so the more we resist getting to know all the different aspects of our being, including the unity, the diversity, and everything in between, maybe that's why we suffer so much. And if we were to surrender, perhaps, and get to know it through Hermes, which is the part that can bring us the meaning, perhaps that would ease our pain in some ways. We have so many, and I'm sure you referred to it, that there are so many parallels to the Persephone myth in other cultures. And in the Torah, you have it also from the innocence of Eden. Adam and Eve are thrown into the barren earth. And then there is the story of the sons of God abducting, or not abducting actually, but falling in love or getting to mate with the daughters of the earth. And all of these little elements are here and there referring to something that has to happen within all of us, which you illuminated so beautifully. But specifically, I'd like to know if you came across any references to the pomegranate as a symbol of unity and diversity, which I think we're all struggling, all humanity is struggling with this. How do we make a unity out of all this diversity that's at war at this point in our human destiny? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitra, very much. I love what you've said about this unity and diversity, and I have to confess I don't remember having seen that. And I read lots about the pomegranate and about the rituals in different cultures and different places, but I don't remember that, or if I did read it, it didn't stick. But I think there's something key there, and that is that capacity to take in and swallow and absorb that notion of opposites, in this case, unity and diversity, and to remember it, and to keep digesting it, and keep exploring it from a personal place. How do I every day find a way to hold both? Because it really is, it is that's the savior, really. That's what's going to save us.
Very good. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you very
I
much.
hope everyone, I implore everyone to take a minute today and just keep good thoughts for all sides of this conflict, because it really can engulf our whole world. So with all the wonderful people at the Jungian Club, our prayers might be very effective. So I appreciate if everyone can take a minute today and just meditate for peace and harmony.
Charmaine Pack.
I just have a comment. I'm not one to speak like this, but I just need to tell you how much I was held by your words and your images. I was just, I'm just very, very touched by hearing the story again, and I became all the, and the richness of each character in such depth. I'm just so grateful, and know how wonderfully you can transmit that for me. Thank you.
Charmaine, thank you so much for speaking up and saying that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a great pleasure. And this material is deep and it takes me every time I'm with it. So I'm glad to know that you also were held and moved by it. Thank you.
I think Charmaine was speaking for many of us. I think many of us had those reactions. And I think that's a lovely way to end. So thank you so much again. And it was really very, very moving.
You're very welcome. It was a deep pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Hope to see all of you in November on Synchronicity. And bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Judy.